Good morning. If I were Tobias, I would have second thoughts about marrying Sarah based on the previous 7 attempts that she had at marriage. But we see this kind of desperation that both of them have that leads to a profound trust in God, that leads them to marriage, which is their path to heaven. The gospel, the Sadducees who don't believe in the resurrection are trying to trick Jesus with this question about wives and brothers and everything. But we recognize that marriage is something that leads to heaven. Marriage, that's the purpose of marriage. It helps you to get to heaven, right? It's your job to get your spouse to heaven, and your spouse helps you to get to heaven. Sometimes that's difficult, right? Yeah? Sometimes it's more like a cross than a grace. But marriage is this gift that God has given to us from the time of creation, right? From the very beginning of time with Adam and Eve. And it's this gift that helps us to witness the love of God, but in preparation for heaven. And so the Sadducees say, okay, well, in heaven, who's this woman going to be married to? Which of the 7 brothers will she be married to? And Jesus says, you don't understand, right? In the resurrection, there is no need for marriage, because there is no need to see this model of the love of God for his people, because you will be present at the beatific vision. You will be present before God. You will see really and truly my love for you. You will experience in a real profound way my love for you. You won't need an image. You won't need a helpmate to help you to get to where you need to be, because you're already here. And so marriage is this institution that God has given the grace of a sacrament in order to assist a couple to get to heaven, but also in order to assist the rest of us to witness the love of God, to witness the sacrificial love of God. And so Jesus is saying, look, God is not a God of the dead. He's not a God of things that don't matter anymore on earth. He's a God of He's a God of the people who have risen and who are with him, right? He's the God of the living. He's the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. He's the God of everybody who has gone to be with him. And so we live now here in this kind of preparation for heaven, right? It's not just to say that kind of our earthly life is a means to an end, but rather it's an opportunity for us to recognize God, to hear his voice, to do his will, and to allow ourselves to be sanctified, to be made holy, to prepare ourselves for a life in heaven. And so we live in a time that is dangerous because, well, really it's always been a time that's dangerous, because if you want to recognize the devil's attempt to scatter humanity, it's been attacking marriage from day one, right? Adam and Eve, he drove this division between them, right? Did God really tell you that? We see it all throughout history. Attacks on marriage that even in the case of Tobias and Sarah, that there's this demon that's tormenting Sarah, right? So that marriage cannot be a thing, so that marriage cannot exist. Of course, today we live in a time in which marriage can pretty much be whatever it wants. I don't think it's legal yet, but probably like tomorrow it'll be legal that men can marry dogs, right? If I said that 10 years ago, you'd be like, oh, that's hyperbole and that's ridiculous and that's crazy, right? But now we're like, yeah, probably pretty soon that's gonna be the case, right? And it's not so much about redefining marriage as like, oh, marriage can be whatever you want. It's diminishing the value of marriage as the way to heaven, right? Families together, growing in holiness, growing in faith, getting to heaven. Families being united in prayer, right? If we can strike against the family, if we can scatter the family, if we can separate families, if we can break families, then people have less of a chance of growing in holiness. They have less of a chance of understanding the love of God. They have less of a chance of going to heaven, right? Because the family is this fundamental unit of society and the church, right? It's within our family where we learn to love God. It's within our family where we learn to pray. It's within our family where we learn to recognize the love of God, right? We learn mercy, we learn justice, we learn about holiness. And so the family is the fundamental unit that we have to strive to protect, that we have to strive to uphold, that we have to strive to support, right? Families need support. Families need to be able to come together. That's one of the purposes of family catechesis, and it's a continuing evolution of how we do that process. But the important thing is that we're striving as a parish to give an opportunity to families to be able to grow together in holiness. Because if we don't, if we just kind of focus on everybody on their own, we'll do the young people here, and we'll do the middle-aged people here, and we'll do the old people here, and it won't work, right? We've got to bring the family together. Society more and more just pushes family apart, right? Divides families, right? One kid's got to go to, Timbuktu to play soccer, and the other kid's got to go to some other place very far away to play whatever other sport. Families don't eat together. Families don't have the opportunity to pray together. Families don't even want to talk about prayer or holiness. Ugh, Mom, why do you always have to bring up church stuff? Right? Doesn't matter if your kids are 5, 10, 18, 55, right? All of you can probably relate in some way to that. And so we have to pray for the holiness of families. We have to pray for the unity of families. And more than prayer, right? Jesus says some demons can only be cast out by fasting, right? By prayer and fasting. And so we look and we've got this demon Asmodeus, a mean-sounding name, right? Who's trying to prevent Sarah from having a marriage, from having a family. There's demons at work in our world that are striving to divide, to diminish, to reduce families, to show that marriage is not important, to show that it's just, it's an outdated thing that, who cares if you... But there are demons at work in our world, and we have to be aware of that. Now, that doesn't mean that we should be all scared and running around checking under our bed for the boogeyman, but it does mean that we should recognize the power of Jesus Christ, right? And that in following him, and not just following him oh, there he is over there, I'm following him because I see him, but following him by doing his will, right? By praying, by fasting, by doing penance, by doing works of charity, by doing works of mercy, by proclaiming the gospel. That's what it means to follow Christ. To actually do the things that he asked us. Go and teach all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit. That our homes can be schools of prayer. Pope Francis talked about that when he was here in the United States several years back for the meeting on families. He said, families should be a school of prayer where you learn to pray, where you learn to know God, where you learn to love God. We've got these rising ninth graders here for their confirmation class, and as we kind of are shifting the age, hoping that a younger age for confirmation will allow the information to kind of penetrate the teenage brain a little bit better, but also, probably more importantly, recognizing that the grace that God gives in the sacrament is something that they need, right? That they need, especially as they enter into the difficult years of high school. But for those of you that are here, and you're all in the back row, of course, but that's fine. That's fine. You're here. Recognize that, this week is, I know you'd rather be sleeping, or you'd rather be playing video games, or you'd rather be at whatever other fun activity, you'd rather be at camp, or you'd rather be, I don't know. Maybe, no, you're not old enough to work, so you can't do that. And you probably wouldn't want to do that anyway. But recognize that you're here and you have this opportunity to hear the voice of a God who loves you, right? God is not this big guy sitting up in the sky waiting for us to mess up so that he can squash us. But God is a God who loves us, who revealed himself to us, right? The God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob. He's made himself present so that we can know him, so that we can love him, so that we can follow him. He calls us to something that is way better than anything we can come up with here on earth. He calls us to something way more important than whatever else it was that we were going to do this week. He calls us to something way more important than wanting to do our own will. He calls us to friendship with him. Friendship. Now, y'all are transitioning from middle school to high school, and I remember when I went from middle school to high school, and granted it was a small school small schools, and some of my classmates went with me, and some of them didn't, but there were more people, and it was this big, ocean of people, and so like my first semester I didn't have lunch with any of my friends that I knew from school. It was awkward, and I was like, oh, this is awful, I don't know what to do. And so what I started doing was, now I went to Catholic school, what I started doing was they offered kind of a prayer service in the chapel at the beginning of each lunch period. And so I went to the chapel at the beginning of each lunch period, and there was a communion service, so I was able to receive Holy Communion. And I went kind of trying to strike up a bargain with God, right? Hey, God, I'm going to come and I'm going to pray and I'm going to go to the chapel each day, but I want you to take care of me, okay? I want you to, find me someone that I can sit with, especially if she's pretty, that would be really great. You help me out, and I'll come and visit you, okay? So I was basically treating God like he was a Coke machine, right? Here, I'm going to put a quarter in, or however much it costs to get a Coke out of a machine, probably like $6. I'm going to put this in, and they have credit card things on them now too, don't they? Right? Yeah. Anyway, I'm going to do this for you, God, and I want you to do something in return for me. And that's not how it works, right? It's not this kind of transactional thing, we do something for God. But that opens the door that if we can trust God, if we can say, God, I want to serve you, I want to do your will, right? Then something good can happen, right? Now, I've told this story before, but I went to the chapel every day before lunch because I wanted to date to homecoming my freshman year, right? I was trying to find my girlfriend, right? Here I am. I'm 34 years old. I have 3 cats. But I live a very happy and fulfilled life because I'm doing the will of God, right? People often ask me as a priest, hey, priest, you must be lonely, right? Celibate. Well, I got my 3 cats, I live with Father Michael too, so that's fun. Not every priest lives with Father Michael, so that, that's fun. We hang out, we talk, we watch TV. But to recognize that wherever it is that God calls you in your life, right? Right now he's calling you to be sitting in the back rows of St. Clair of Assisi Catholic Church, and then you're going to go sit in a classroom until about noon, and you might be bored, but if you really say, hey, God, what's going on? What am I supposed to get out of this? Ask honestly, right? What are you trying to do for me here? I don't necessarily like the things that the church says about this or that, right? I don't like that I have to wake up early and come to church. But what do you want from me? What do you want me to do? What is your will for me? What are you calling me to? Well, first and foremost, he's calling each and every one of us to holiness, right? How is he calling us to holiness? Well, for the majority, eventually through marriage, right? Because that's the way to heaven. Some to the priesthood and the religious life. That's a possibility, right? Don't be like, oh, that's crazy. That's a possibility. But God is calling us to holiness. And so in our own lives, let us ask the Lord, how may I do your will? It's for all of us. It's for the rising ninth graders, and it's for the oldest among you. I don't know who that is, and I'm not going to ask, and I'm not going to assume either. But for all of us, right, what is God calling me to? Right now, God is calling me to become holy. God is calling me to become a saint. God is calling me to do His will. And sometimes that means breaking the mold. Sometimes that means going outside the box. Sometimes that means taking risks. Every time I open my mouth, I realize I'm taking a risk because I have no idea what's going to come out. And sometimes my foot goes in, and I'm like, I really shouldn't have said that. And then I get nasty emails or calls from the bishop, and like, yeah, I know I shouldn't have said that, but I was trying to push the limit to try to break out of the box, to try to lead others to God, right? And if we just keep sitting here and doing the same thing, right, and just keep, okay, yep, I'm going to go to church, and maybe I'm going to go to church every day of the week. That's great. But what else am I going to do, right? I can't just sit here and do nothing. I can't just sit here and receive. I can't just sit here and be passive. I got to do. I got to be apostolic, right? I have to be sent into the world. I have to proclaim the gospel. And so in our own lives, let us recognize that God indeed, though He may put us through hardship, right? Though we may suffer like Tobias and Sarah, though we may suffer like everybody suffered, though we may suffer like Jesus suffered, right? Suffering's inevitable. But through that suffering comes sanctification. Through that suffering comes salvation. And so let us ask the Lord that He would continue to pour His blessing upon us, that through that suffering, that through the hardships of life, that through our families, that we may each grow in holiness, so that we may one day sit in the presence of God in heaven.